To all those people watching, I would like to remind everyone that this video is not made strictly for kids. It is for older fans and adults too. Enjoy the fucking video! This video is brought to you by my loyal patrons. Register now at any tier to watch new videos 1 month in advance before they're made public. Link is in the description. It had been some time since Scott's journey to America. Ever since he was saved by his new owner from his potential doom, he had been travelling to other parts of the mainland and even made some trips to the island of Sodor. Everyone was glad to see that he was safe and sound from his big adventure, and so was Scott. Scott often thought about his travels across the United States, and he often thought about the countries he had been invited to. He enjoyed thinking of the possibility, but then remembered what had almost happened to him when his previous owner declared himself bankrupt. He then feared the possibility of it all becoming true. But he would always say, "I don't have to worry about that. I don't think suoi would ever think of sending me to another country anytime soon."
If you ever visit the island of Sodor and are interested in the stories from the various railways, then you should visit the Railway Archives. It's a treasure trove of stories over the years with all of the engines across the island of Sodor, big or small. Let's take a look at all the stories that are a blast from the past for the engines of Sodor.
But one day, Sir William came to see him at the sheds to tell him some exciting news. A group of people in Australia are going to have a special skiing spectacular in Melbourne, Victoria, in celebration of Australia's bicentenary called Austin 88 later on in the year, with every locomotive from each state. To make it even more special, a chap going by the name of Walter had asked you to take part in the festivities as well. "All the way in Australia?" asked Scott. "Yes, would you like to take part in it?" Scott was worried. What if history were to repeat itself? What if the idea of being stranded, never returning home, and never seeing Gordon again would come true? He wanted to say no, but he didn't want to let his owner nor the organisers down. "Yes, of course, sir," he said with a forced grin. "Splendid. I'll make the arrangements." Ever since the popularity of the books, and of course the television series, Scott often did tours to the island so his passengers could see Sir Charles Topham Hatt's engines. Usually he enjoyed it, but the dreaded feeling was still at him. He decided not to talk about it to the other engines, including Gordon. "They'll only get worried," he thought to himself. One day Gordon backed down onto a special train. He was to take Scott's visitors to the Railway Museum at Vickerstown. A couple of enthusiasts were talking after taking his picture. He didn't hear all of what they're saying, but he heard two words being Scotsman and Australia. "I wonder what Scott has to do with Australia," he thought. When he returned later in the day, Gordon asked Scott about it. Scott looked worried, but he knew it would come out eventually. So, he put on a face of forced excitement and said, "Yes, it's true, Gordon," and explained about the reason behind the idea. "A stage spectacular!" gasped James. "Why didn't they invite me?" he groaned. "You're needed here, James," chuckled Henry. He then looked towards Scott and said, "You are a very lucky engine, Scott. Not many steam engines get to go on a world tour like you. My driver had been to Australia once before and told me that it was a very different but beautiful country. Are you looking forward to it?" "Oh, yes, I am," replied Scott quietly. Scott's gentle reply was quite different to the enthusiasm he displayed when he told him about his trip to America. "Is everything all right, Scott?" Gordon asked. I thought you would be more enthusiastic about it. But I am, Gordon. See the smile on my face? I am very excited. Gordon was quite taken aback. But before he could say anything else, Scott closed his eyes and said, It has been a long day, Gordon, and I need my sleep. I have more trains to pull in the morning. Good night. The next day, Scott made his way into the station, ready for another day trip with his passengers. Scott, I could sense it, said Gordon. Sense what? Asked Scott. I could sense that you were worried about this trip to Australia. Is that because you fear that you might be stranded once again like you were in San Francisco years ago? Nonsense, Gordon, Scott snorted. Did you hear me last night? I said I was happy. Happy! And when the guard blew his whistle, the big green Pacific puffed away, leaving Gordon behind, more worried for his brother. As Scott puffed down the line, he was still thinking about the possibility of being stranded in another country. Wherever Scott went, a throng of people gathered at stations, line-side, bridges and fences to see him pass by. However, some take risks to try and get the best picture of him, and would think about their safety last. At Marin, one enthusiast thought he would get a good picture by kneeling down on the station platform's edge. The station master tried his best to control the crowd, and then he saw him, but he could not get through. Meanwhile, further away from Marin, Scott was puffing down the line with his passengers. He was still thinking about what could happen if his trip to Australia were to go down the same route as America's. Will Mr. McAlpine save me again? Or would I be scrapped for sure this time? I just don't know. Oh, why did I agree to go to Australia? Unfortunately, Scott's worrying made him lose attention, and what was up ahead. The enthusiast, still kneeling down, could hear him coming and was about to get his shot ready. As his driver blew Scott's whistle to alert the crowd that he was coming through, it broke his trance. Great heavens, he gasped. Move, he yelled. But as the enthusiast was clicking his camera away, Scott could feel his wheels swerving over some points. He was surprised, and so were the crowd and the photographer. Quickly, the photographer jumped up from his spot and took his photographs as Scott passed by onto a passing loop, and then was switched back onto the middle track. Everyone was happy, but the photographer wasn't pleased by the last-minute switch. The station master came towards him crossly after the crowd had dispersed. The reason Scott had changed lines, he said sternly, is because you were putting your own safety at risk by kneeling down on the platform edge, sir. Engines speed through here on express runs, and with you kneeling down, not only would your camera have been destroyed, but you wouldn't be able to share them physically with your friends or family. I had to telephone the signalman about it, and thankfully he agreed just before Scott came through. You may not have been happy with your picture, sir, but may I remind you that your life had been saved by me, and if you do that act again at a different station, you might not be so lucky. I hope you learned something from this. The man gulped, thinking about the potential consequences of his actions, and agreed never to do it again, and he walked away back to his car. As he reached the big station, he saw Gordon simmering in the yards. He then thought about what his brother had said to him earlier. If I had told him about my fear, perhaps I would have kept a good lookout today. After he pulled into the station, he backed down alongside Gordon in the shed. Gordon heard of Scott being switched onto a different track at Marin, and asked him what had happened. Just an enthusiast not thinking about what he was doing. But I wasn't looking out for such danger because something was playing on my mind. Gordon, remember yesterday when you asked me if I was alright, and that you can sense that I wasn't? Well, you were right. I'm actually not alright at all. I am worried about this trip to Australia. Ever since being stuck at that army base in California, not knowing the outcome, I always fear that happening to me again. and that maybe this time the idea of me not coming home might come true." "I thought so," replied Gordon quietly, "and it was very brave of you to have finally talked about it with someone. I can understand the feeling of fear in the unknown, but it's natural to feel like that, Scott, and there's no shame in doing that. But you'd never know what this trip to Australia might be like. Perhaps it would be much better than what you had done in America. Why, you could meet or work with that engine who had crossed the entire country 18 years ago. I heard from my driver that he's often called the Australian equivalent of you. You just never know the outcome, Scott." Then Sir William came towards him, who had overheard the whole conversation. "I'm sorry, Scott. If I understood your feelings, perhaps maybe—" "There's no need to apologize, sir. I should have been more open about them. At first I would have said no, but after hearing what Gordon had said, I'm looking forward to it. If I had said no, perhaps I'd regret it later on in life. Besides, I have often thought about the idea of going around the world." "Well," chuckled Sir William, "it would be nice to travel around the world, Scott, but I don't think many of your fans will like the idea themselves." Gordon and Scott laughed. After that, Scott was feeling much better, and the dark thoughts that he endured earlier had started to fade away, and he carried out trips on Sodor until it was time for him to leave. "Have fun in Australia, Scott," said Gordon. "Do us all proud." "I will, Gordon, and thank you for everything," replied Scott. "See you in 6 months, big brother," and with that, Scott puffed away. "You sure his trip will be better than what he endured in America, Gordon?" asked Murdoch. "I just have a good feeling about this one," replied Gordon, and he was right. When Scott arrived in Australia, lots of people came to see him wherever he went. And many of his trains were so popular that extra trips had to be made to keep up with demand. His visit was so popular that the money generated from his trips and from being on display in Melbourne during Austin was enough to secure him the return trip home. The Australian engines gave him a warm welcome too, and he even got to work with Clyde, 3801 as he's often called, who was the engine that had crossed the country and was called the equivalent of him. And both had forged such a close friendship that even to this day they stayed in contact. But although Scott was to stay in Australia for 6 months, he was so popular that his visit had been extended to a whole year. Gordon was sad that his brother would be away for some time, but he was glad to know that Scott was having so much fun, and that this time his home journey wouldn't end up being a rescue mission.